All right, we're back. It's post game. So yeah, let's pick this up. As one might expect when we're having a discussion about this sort of either to just kind of let the basic structures of a capitalist economy do their thing, and kind of let the thresher take whatever flesh it craves, or whether we should actually like try to put some kind of guardrails on it to make human life bearable. So as you would expect, given that that's the basic subject of discussion, right now they're talking about unicorns.
Yeah, it really just reminding me how annoyed I was in that part. Yeah, God. I think every country has a billion unicorns because the unicorns aren't real. So I think everyone has a million of them. Ridiculous. Yeah, it's just talking about the right-wing canard of markets and innovation. It's not accurate.
Yeah, it's like, okay, he's obviously wrong given the points about Stockholm. Even California fits very inconsistently in his narrative.
And despite being a tyranny, it has all this innovation. Yes.
Whatever. It's like all that's obviously true, but also like, why do we give a shit about unicorns? Like, surely the question should be like how much innovation is there, not like how much of it is by like particular kinds of firms that like happen to cater to like what your ideology expects you to think innovation is going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like if we can measure it based on how many overvalued VC capital backed tech firms there are, I mean, why can't I do it in some other dumb way? Like, traditionally you do this stuff by like patents filed, and then it's like a completely different story. And I don't know, it's just such a clumsy way of doing it. I just can't stand it. This reminds me of like a few years ago. It's like, well, markets innovate, NFTs, very exciting, Bitcoin. Like, a lot of these innovations are just worthless, energy wasting things. And AI is a pretty big part of that. Not any real commercial potential for it yet, but just that's enough to light up the stock market that we have ChatGPT, like a fancy version of your phone text predictor with a shitload of energy and global warming behind it. And this is just stock market. That's all it takes.
I'm sorry, but ChatGPT, that's not fair. ChatGPT is a massive advance if you don't want to write your own papers.
It's true. Major advantage is being able to avoid even the smallest of trials and burdens that come with a normal human life. Is writing a text message to your mom when she asks you to make basic plans for the family too much for you? Get ChatGPT to talk to your mother. Have her talk to your girlfriend. Shit. Get it wired so you never speak. Soon you're just a blob of gelatin in your complete pleasure.
Yeah, no, that's what we all want, right? To be the people in WALL-E.
Yes, exactly. Those chairs were pretty great, but I don't want that reality, for myself.
Yeah, I'd certainly rather not. All right. Well, with that in mind, let's return to the main event. Where are we here? Come on. Where is it? I'm on.
Too many tabs, young man.
I know. I have way too many tabs open right now. This is ridiculous.
I'm a ruthless police state about tabs. I try not to go to bed till I've killed all the ones I've opened during the day.
That's a good idea, actually.
That's why I never sleep, though. That's just one downside.
Yeah, there you go. All right. I have fucking things on my screen. Where's the let's see. There we go.
Let's watch.
Can you do the Financial Times not always right? And these numbers change, of course, over time. All you need is a few IPOs, and the unicorn numbers shift around. Well, anyway, I'll take more freedom.
If so, that sounds like a shitty measurement.
You're the one who insisted on how I'm even. If you were just going to say that in the first place, why'd you make me sit through all this stupid unicorn shit? Yo, Ron, you got me that time.
Yeah. Seriously.
God damn it, you're wrong.
Sounds like a bullshit metric. Like we could have skipped the last 5 minutes of talking about it.
You know, folks, this is why Yaron is a friend of the show, as they say. Like you are seeing the value. Oh, Yaron, I've had it with you today. I look forward to debating him again in a year when all these things will happen again.
Fair enough.
Over slightly high GDP power. Yeah, econ.
Yeah, I think to pivot a little bit, I think an interesting question that one of my co-hosts on the regular Three Wonks podcast asked, and Matt alluded to it, but I think it's probably the most important question because Yarn, you alluded to the counterfactual that we've never had a society that, or like currently we don't have a society that doesn't have a lot of welfare. But Matt alluded earlier to the idea that, well, we had a society experimentally that did not have Social Security, and then we implemented Social Security, and it seemed like elderly poverty went down a lot. And so that sort of discontinuity in poverty seems to potentially indicate some causation of the program. And so when we compare like pre-welfare societies to our current like modern inclination, what do we see in terms of poverty? Are those numbers a lot more ambiguous if you look deeper into them? I mean, how do you analyze that situation?
So Social Security was introduced during the depths of the Depression. There's no question it helped people during the Depression. That's a reality. I'm not gonna challenge those numbers. But I would say that if you had not had Social Security, if those people had not been helped during the Great Depression, and if you had had the counterfactual of a free market going from then to today, and of course there was no free market even before that, but put that aside, there was at least no welfare state before that, not significant welfare state before it. I think those elderly people would be much wealthier. I mean, it would be orders of magnitude difference. So again, I can't prove that in terms of data. This is part of the problem of taking my position data-wise, because I can't prove it in terms of data. And I would say that Hong Kong's a good example of a country that had very little welfare. It had some, but it had very little welfare. It grew tremendously. GDP per capita was very high in Hong Kong, higher than the United States, higher than the Nordic countries, in spite of the fact that, and it did it in half the time the United States did, right? It did it in like 70 years, whereas the US, it took us to get to GDP per capita that we have today, it took us 250 years. So, you've got a few measures, but yes, I mean, does the welfare help this particular group in the short run? If I give you money, sure, it helps you in that sense. There's no question. So when you give the child credit during COVID, it helps them. But then maybe that had something to do with inflation. Maybe, right? And maybe we're all paying for that help that the children got with higher prices today. And maybe overall, over the long run, those children are actually worse off because things are more expensive today. And hey, we couldn't afford to keep that going forever, or at least that was the perception. So it's very difficult empirically to evaluate when you don't have a counterfactual, and you can't actually look at what would happen unless you look at the principle. The principle is that everybody, in spite of what Matt said earlier, everybody benefits from dramatic economic growth. And I think that markets that are unregulated and do not have the burden of taxation that a welfare state imposes on them grow dramatically faster than markets that don't. And as a consequence, look, I lived in Israel when it was socialist. Everybody was much more equal back then. And Israel today is a lot less socialist. It still has a big welfare state, but it's a lot less socialist. I mean, economic growth is incomparable. And the quality of life and standard of living is incomparable, even of the poor. So the benefits of doing away with all the regulations and restrictions and redistributions that were associated with socialism and moderating them somewhat are huge. Same thing has happened in the UK. If you go back to the 70s, UK was socialism, government ownership, and regulation and controls. And then you look at the Thatcher Revolution, everybody's better off. Now, they're not as well off as they would have been if Thatcher would have gone all the way. She was way too moderate. But they're better off. They're dramatically better off than that old, much more intense welfare state. So if you look at cross-sections within countries, even in the Nordic countries are much better off today with much smaller government expenditures, right? If you take Sweden spends per GDP per capita a lot less money today than it did 40 years ago. And it's doing a lot better, much less.
It's not spending that much less. What happened with the sort of neoliberal turn there was some privatization, but the spending levels didn't decline that much. But that could be to your point, right? Now, what I would like to push back on here conceptually is, Econo Boy tries, he comes in and says, look, I don't know, doesn't redistribution help? And then you repeat your point that, okay, maybe it helps sort of now, but in the long run, it so retards growth that it's not worth it. I can then come back and say, I don't know, look at these countries, they're growing pretty well. And then you can kind of be befuddled by this GDP per hour thing. But remember, there's a second point here, which is that redistribution can also promote growth in ways that maybe, even if we grant some of your arguments about it cutting down on incentives and whatever, that perhaps completely offsets those, right? And that could help explain why we don't seem to see lower growth in these more big welfare state countries. So the main arguments people make for this, are pretty simple, right? Which is that poverty has like long-term impacts on people's ability to contribute and be productive, right? If you can't eat, it's hard to work. If you can't, if you don't have a nice, stable, high, well-resourced childhood, you're maybe not going to be so smart, or be less smart, less IQ, whatever, right? You're not going to achieve as much educationally.
Sure.
And then in the business calculation context, it's true, maybe if people can have these massive financial rewards whenever they start a successful business, that might get some people going. On the flip side, knowing that if you fail, you're going to be okay, that might also make people who are more risk averse say, all right, I'll give it a go because it's, I'm not going to suffer a huge loss if I do. And it seems like the combination of those factors offset whatever the negative incentives are, and which helps explain why we don't see these big divergences in growth rates between high welfare and lower welfare society. So what do you make of those arguments about the ways in which the welfare state can actually promote growth in these kind of maybe counterintuitive ways?
Well, I think they're again minor and short term. I think since poverty, gets alleviated much faster in a free market, all those benefits go away, right? So yes, people need to eat, people need to, but they do so much better in a free market without a welfare state. Maybe it takes a little longer because you're giving them the cash payment right now, and maybe but in terms of, it happens much more and much faster if you actually allow for a free market. If you look at the rates at which poverty declined when capitalism introduced, it's stunning. Those rates are truly stunning. If you look at a country, at a place like Hong Kong, and you look at the poor in Hong Kong and their ability to work and be productive, there are very few people who are unemployed in Hong Kong. It looks like they can do okay, and they can get to the point where they're making enough money so that they're eating enough and they're living in a decent place and so on. Social mobility accelerates under freedom. The more welfare, the more constraint. And we haven't talked about all the negatives of welfare. Here's a good story. This is just a story is this the New York Times? No, it's the Telegraph. Telegraph in the UK, about a seaside town in the UK where pretty much everybody is sick. Right, a huge percentage of the population is sick. Why are they sick? Because if they're sick, they get welfare. They get benefits. And the number has increased dramatically over time, not because of anything in the environment has changed or anything has made them sick, but because as welfare becomes more generous, the moral hazard increases, and you get a great. And indeed, in the United States, the mobility in the United States has shrunk since the start of the welfare state, and I think would shrink even more if you increase the welfare state in the United States. And the consequence of this is that people who should be working, could be working, have the ability to work, are not working, are living off of welfare. And that is destructive to their own self-esteem. It's destructive to their own capacity, to take care of themselves, to take care of their families. They're not dependents of the state.
So I just wanted to pause here to once again ask the question, maybe a little bit more sharply, given the way that you're on to set this up. Like, are we worried about the self-esteem of people who live off of inherited wealth? Is their self-esteem going to be okay?
Oh. Okay, I lost audio there. Oh, you're back. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just saying, like, I'm really trying to get clear on the rules here.
Yeah.
Like, are we worried about the self-esteem of people who live off of capital ownership? Are we worried about the self-esteem of people who live off of inherited wealth? Are they okay?
Yeah, and as you put up earlier, vibes-based data. Like if this is the concern, but really, like I think Bruenig let the point go too easily about like welfare supporting growth, if that's a major goal. Like one book I would recommend to everybody is The Body Economic. It's by a medical doctor and some public health expert, and it's just a comparative history of like investing in health, and it just compares Iceland and Greece in 2009 after the finance crisis and the depths of that really bad previous recession. And Greece was, under the rules of its bailout package with the EU, basically Germany, and had to implement intense austerity and cut way back on pensions for very poor Greek people, which will only make them richer, as I have now learned, but actually make them poorer. It's so confusing. And privatize a ton of shit. And whereas Iceland just deficit spent, public good invested its way out of that horrible recession. And they had one of the worst economic crashes of any country in 2008. Iceland, had losses larger than its own GDP, which is pretty intense. And they did it mainly by investing in like two of the really big public goods, as dirty Keynesian and left economists call it, investing in health and education. But it turns out like a lot of development isn't just industrializing. It isn't just having giant Chinese export complexes. Like money needs to go into investing in us, the human beings that are nominally the goal and not the ends of the system, and investing in our health and our brains, like the things that we have going for us, and then in other public goods like infrastructure that are easier for them to do because they don't involve changing or uplifting the people you're supposed to rule over. Like those things are good for growth. Like that got Iceland out of it, and that's a smaller economy than freaking Greece was. It definitely has a growth supporting effect if you aren't fighting the capital markets horribly on it, which was an advantage that Iceland did have. I don't know. I would tend to make a stronger case than Bruenig does. Like this stuff, half of the reason we have public goods is to support the friggin' market and all your precious private growth. It's hard to build up an amazing, wonderful job-creating company like Amazon if you don't have any dumb roads that are good enough to send my slick trucks.
This is the point that I think I was making a couple of weeks ago. We talked. It's like, okay, yeah, like Randians use this phrase like, "Oh, we want to like separate the state from the economy the same way we separate church from state." It's like, and I always want to know how seriously they mean that, right? Because it's like, so no roads, no publicly printed currency. No
break on exchange rates at all. Just complete.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just following your idea through. Like people don't think about the architecture.
No limited liability, presumably, right? I mean, that's a pretty big state intervention in the economy. Limited liability corporation.
Yeah, who cares if you own it? I want your property after you just burn my town down or whatever.
Yeah. Like there's so much like there's so many ways that the state props up the market. It's it's just wild to not to mention that the workforce anything but the like outside of the most menial jobs, you presumably want like at least a little bit of an educated workforce, right? Like
they need to know the numbers at least. I feel for money counting. I feel at least the numbers must be essential. It may be even more. And you can't do any of this shit without your precious property rights and contract law, and all of that takes a big fat state infrastructure. Like in early America, that's all the state infrastructure there was shit that serves property directly. Like,
oh my God, and intellectual property. I mean, a lot of state intervention going on there. It's just, this stuff is really wild to me. It's like you really, So when you peer into this alternate universe, there are no roads, there's no infrastructure, but there's actually a much more thriving economy. In fact, it thrives so much that it's all boom, no bust ever.
There'll definitely be multiple roads next to each other. So if you don't like one road private owners rates and tolls, you can drive on the next one or the next one and so on. All roads will be a mile across in the future of the Ayn Rand reality. And just finally, we should get back, but just finally there, Brook never did have any response to that basic social science testament to the effectiveness of social policy, that is the decrease in senior poverty in the U.S. after come on, we had a huge amount and now we have a small amount. He says, I won't contest the numbers. Well, he won't contest them, but he won't really argue against them, except that he said without it, it would be orders of magnitude better. Orders of magnitude. Jesus Christ. That's
he's got the device from Rick and Morty that lets you watch TV from alternate dimensions, and he's watching the business channels and the NBC business and all that. He's watching all that, in the Randian world, and it just astounds him every time he sees it. Yeah, orders of magnitude. That's amazing. But it's also look, how about before the depression, right? It's even aside from the fact that economic downturns are a thing, they're going to happen, right? It's not oh, well, that was just a one-time event, right? How about the 1920s? What was it like to be a elderly poor person in the 1920s, do you think, right?
Street grandmas is what you encounter when you go to countries that have been kept too poor by neoliberalism to have public pension programs. They have what we had, street grandmas. Difficult thing to confront on a sunny day.
Exactly. Harshes up your whole afternoon.
Bro, the vibes are fucked.
Yeah, vibes are fucked. Exactly. You want to fuck the vibes? No, it's amazing. This is, this is okay. You're also, you said, it's also I love this speculation. It's oh, maybe the inflation was so bad that the doubling of child poverty wasn't as bad as it would have been if we just kept the child tax credit where it was. It's well, that's convenient. I mean, this is, do you have any reason to think that?
Yeah, it sounds like special pleading unless you have a reason for it, oh, well, perhaps this would have happened. Perhaps. How about any reason to believe in that version of events? I don't know. Not my favorite. Oh, I will say too, I do the very last move we had there. I have this note also. Great to pull up an article from the Telegraph there. I'll show you how bad welfare is. Here's a billionaires magazine for blue collar gullibles. And what does it say here? Awful welfare cheats. Everyone in the city's sick. Why? No reason. Benefits. I mean, if you look into it, you might read about a chemical spill or an East Palestine type incident, but it's welfare cheats. It's right here in a rich man's newspaper. So.
Well, it's also weird. It's well, is there more support in that town than there is in the rest of the UK? If you're sick, is it? I mean, that's because that'd be strange, right? That stuff usually isn't municipal, the sort of the Medicare, Medicaid, this is I know they have the NHS, but if you have welfare payments for for people, the equivalent of if you're not old enough but you're getting Social Security because of disability, right? This is is that municipal? That'd be a really weird way to set it up. And if not,
life is easy here in Lazyton. We've long been the laziest town in Britain.
Yeah, exactly.
And always will be, thanks to the social benefits we receive.
Yeah, what's the tax base like? I have so many questions here. I mean, presumably, if you're saying in this town, it's not in the UK, everybody is sick.
Yeah, so you're saying it only went wrong in one town. That's pretty good. I mean, that's, the other towns aren't in the headlines for their laziness. I don't know. gotta have a shitty town. I don't know. Why blame it on our policies? Maybe it's your fault. I just feel like in 30 years, Fox News will go like, here's another community where everyone's living off the public dole. East Palestine. Let's see. Who knows why these people are lazy? Like, that's 30 years from now. In 2054.
Exactly. It's like, oh, what are the chances everybody?
They all just had the idea together to be lazy and live large standards of living off our incredibly generous social policies. Good Lord.
Which is just horrific if I think of their own psychology. So the welfare state is destructive to the people who receive the welfare, at least a portion of them, in ways that we cannot measure as economists, but in ways that psychologically, in terms of quality of life, massive. And you see that in communities where there's just no social mobility. They're welfare recipient after welfare recipient, generation after generation, and no social mobility, which is tragic. It's tragic.
We can measure some of these claims, though, right? So if we want to say that the welfare state reduces employment, right? Again, we don't have the zero welfare state alternative, but we can, again, compare the big welfare states to the small welfare states. If you go to the Nordic countries, that's always my kind of go-to for the big welfare states. That's sort of what they're famous for. They have higher employment rates than the U.S. has. Now, they do have less hours worked, right? But in terms of employment rates, they have higher employment rates than we have. And then even again, we'll turn to the social mobility question, which is not something I'm as concerned about, but people study this. They use, what is it called? The intergenerational elasticity of earnings or whatever. There's all these very fancy measurements they use. And a country like Denmark has the highest IGE, that people have measured, and people have done very careful studies into why this is. They have, right? So, because you can try to disentangle,
really
is it because sort of the bottom third of Danish kids get better education, better attainment? What is it, right? Why is it that you get a little bit more mixing?
Mobility in a small gap is much easier than mobility in a big gap. So,
yes, that is what they find. That is what they find, right? Is that in those countries they have shrunk the income differences so that, in the metaphor, the rungs of the ladder are closer together. And that is, people view that as, because even you view it as like, oh, well, that's nothing. That's nothing. It's like, well, that's the solution. That's the welfare state. They solved it through the welfare state.
One is income mobility like you had in the United States when we didn't have a welfare state, and where poor kids could become rich, not become a little less poor in a dull, gray society like the Nordic states. I mean,
you have to have inequality to make that go, right? So I'm looking at it and saying, look, let's look at people moving from the 20th percentile to the 80th percentile. They're beating us by a large margin, and you're just saying, well, the gap between those two is just not that big because everyone's pretty equal. And I'm like, well, what's the downside of that? So people are moving around, and you have equality. You've won total victory on all axes, right?
Why not? Because the downside of that is the 80th percentile is still pretty poor as compared to where you are in the United States. They are poor countries.
GDP per hour worked.
One of them is
GDP per hour worked.
No way. Every single one of them.
GDP per hour worked. Right? That's the relevant measure here. GDP per hour worked. They do a lot more leisure there, but you have to price in the leisure, right? They choose to work less, but when they work, they're as productive as we are.
Not true. The only relevant measure is your standard of living and quality of life, and there's no comparison. There's just no comparison.
What do you mean there's no comparison?
Because they have 4 countries relative to the United States.
But you're using GDP per capita. I do think this is important.
By the measure of the size of the apartments they live in, by the measure of the number of cars they have, and the number of iPhones they have, whatever measure you want of material well-being, they are relatively poor. They just are. By any measure.
Because you have to include leisure. You have to include leisure. You have to include leisure. This is a really important point. Because this plagues the debate over and over again. Okay, let's say you take a country like the United States, just as it is right now. It's super productive, right? I'm not saying the U.S. doesn't have high GDP per hour. It does, right? It's not as high as Sweden, but it's good. Okay, and the people
7.3%.
the workers decide
in the United States.
Workers decide in the United States, you know what? I don't really want to work so much. Let me trim my hours. Let's go to, whatever, 30 hours a week, right? So that cuts output by 25%, theoretically. Okay. Okay, so now there's 25% less to consume, right? And so by your measure, you'd say, much poorer, much poorer, much poorer. But they're looking at it and saying, I got 10 more hours a week, 520 more hours a week to have fun, just hang out, be with my friends, do recreational activities. That is the mistake of the GDP per capita, is that you price leisure at $0, but clearly they are not pricing leisure at $0, as they are intentionally cutting their hours to get more leisure. So you got to do GDP per hour to make any kind of reasonable comparison.
They're not doing it intentionally. They're doing it as government policy.
They pass law, right? But it's a democratic thing, right? And they pass laws to mandate paid time off.
It's not voluntary. It's exactly the point. If you'd given the Swedes options of whether to work an extra 10 hours or not work an extra 10 hours, I'm not sure where they would fall down. They might actually work the extra 10 hours because maybe they'd rather have the extra income than their vacation. But you haven't given them that option because you mandate it. You force them.
Right. But I do want to not get off track on this, because the point here is that they have made a labor and leisure trade-off through the government. It is not the welfare state, i.e. benefits, that is where causing people to individually choose to work less. They make decisions through their unions and through the government to reduce work hours. That's something they have systematically done. And it is not reasonable to price those free hours at $0.
So one of the ways to evaluate this objectively would be, I wish we could run this, is I would like to have free immigration between Sweden and the United States. Open the borders. Swedes can come here. We could go there. Guess where the immigration flow would be? I mean, I have no doubt what it would be. The Swedes would come here, particularly the ambitious ones, particularly the ones that were going to innovate and wanted to produce. The same with Denmark, same with Finland, maybe not Norway, but
okay.
Ooh, another old chestnut getting rolled out.
I don't know what Euron has spoken, but like, if Sweden and the US signed a free movement treaty tomorrow, by 2025, the population of Sweden would have doubled. What the fuck is he talking about?
Clearly. And I would be citizen.
Oh my God. I would totally go to Sweden. Are you kidding?
Let me find a job. I am finding a job away from moving there. That is what it would be. Like, as soon as I find one. That's just that's playing with house money. You can't get called on that bet. So you could just say, I bet they'd all come here. I doubt that. I like health insurance. I like to not get shot. I work at a school. I take a risk every day going in and not getting shot in this country. That's like the one of the most infuriating, and all conservatives do this, including libertarians. Just then, why do people come here? Checkmate. Thank you. That's very, very powerful. Yes, we destroy every country around us, and refugees pour in. Like, we're just magnetically, phenomenally great.
yeah, exactly.
We kill all these countries economically. They feel like they don't have any hope where they're from. How did that happen? Well, our involvement begins in 1210, and
it's like it also, by the way, like, this is somewhat testable because we don't. I mean, Sweden and the U.S. is a more extreme contrast, but like, take a gander sometime at a map of the United States and see how much of it is taken up by the border with Canada. What is not a problem? Illegal Canadian immigration.
No, the opposite is the problem. Canada complains about this. This is like issue that is discussed in prominent media in Canada is these fucking Americans sneaking up here for their appendectomies and shit. Because you can't afford that shit in Michigan or Montana or whatever. You're not on insurance, or it's American insurance that you got on an Obamacare exchange. It doesn't cover anything. Like, my God, like it's people sneaking up there. That's a big thing. Like, there are, people trying to get illegally across the border just to do fucking, again, medical tourism, just
yeah, like nobody's like, again, where's the, I've never once heard like a MAGA guy say that we really need that more northern border wall, because that's the only way.
That's always a distant second, the Canada border wall. I really feel I hear about that one less. That could be my imagination.
Yeah, like they're not, the seething masses of Canadians are not yearning to relocate to the United States. The evidence would seem to suggest.
Why would you? And we have all the weather, and everything, and they still don't. Like, it's even more impressive if you look at how cold and dark it is.
Oh my God! And like, I'm saying I would move to Sweden. I live in Southern California, right? Like, it's it's like geographically like fantastic.
Yeah, you would have a transition to
I'm willing to take the cold and the darkness.
That's the spirit. I'm here in Washington State. I will help you, Ben, to acclimatize yourself. Like, there are steps you can take. Warm garments, earth tones. You light your home differently. You can cope with these seasons. But that is, that's like a bold.
Like if I never had to worry about like health insurance again,
ever again. Wow. Oh, just to this day, we're old enough to have been pushing for these things for many years. I still think of it sometimes and go, wow, just every other country with money takes that completely for granted now.
Oh my God, yeah.
And for a long time.
Like everywhere else in the first world and big chunks in the third world, right? Like, this is
small parts even there. Yeah, I mean, it's a poorer standard, they're poorer countries.
Sure, right. But
you get healthcare, like in Mexico. It's
yeah.
At least you have what is available, you may have it, even if you're penniless.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. Like, I think about it too with academia all the time, that like that there are all these like I don't know, like the job that I had at Georgia State, I don't think that job could exist at that like pay scale in a society with universal health care, and certainly in a society with universal health care and free higher education, so they had to worry about paying off their student loans. Like, I literally don't think anybody would apply to that job teaching that many classes for like that salary, right? It's like, I mean, look, you could, like, depending on where you were willing to live, there are trade-offs about, housing costs and all that, but like, you get adjunct and like cobble together something that's like not that different, right, from some of these like full-time university jobs that you'll get like 200 people.
You can't do that is because you don't have health insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like the biggest single obstacle. It sucks in general, but like that's the horrible thing. My God, just a totally different life.
This is why a fun fact that I learned from Sean got the bosses from Sean Richmond's book, Tell the Bosses We're Coming, that for a long time, right? So for like even after like World War II, benefits became more of a thing because the like wage freezes during the war. But like the UAW didn't ask for health insurance because in their contracts, because Walter Reuther and all these guys, right? They were like good social democrats who thought the state should take care of that, and they were like very optimistic for a long time. Surely, like Harry Truman will get around to taking care of this, right? And
FDR, oh God, every time,
yeah. And then, like in the 50s, there was something called the Treaty of Detroit, where they basically made like much longer term contracts with the big three. And that time they finally did ask for health insurance. And apparently, according to Sean's book, part of the rationale was like, okay, look, let's just ask for it. And within a few years, if the company is having to pay for it, they'll actually join us in like demanding like national health care. They'll take it off their plate. So they won't have to, pay for it anymore. Right. So like, so this will actually, little, three-dimensional chess will, like this will actually help us get national health insurance. It's a really interesting question. It's like, all right, it's been 70 years. That didn't happen. And it's like, yeah, I think, I mean, I literally don't know what the alternate explanation is. I'd love to hear one, but it's like, it really seems like the obvious explanation is just that the employer class, they aren't always, but in this particular case, they are class conscious enough to recognize that they would have less leverage if we had national health insurance, so they don't push for it.
It increases worker dependence. I mean, that is, I don't know. That's so, I'm confident I could find that if I looked for it, like the Wall Street Journal or something. Like, I'm sure that at some point that's been like that's close enough to the surface that the American business press, which like is the organ of that class consciousness, it'll be in there somewhere. I expect that
seems.
You're fired, you lose your income and your health insurance. Like, you're just so doubly fucked. So people are scared to strike and scared to change jobs, and you can't start a small business even if you're into that shit. Just the worst. Yeah, I gotta say that particular treaty might have been.
Yep. Yep. Nope. Did not. Yeah, like it. Yeah. It turns out that unfortunately the tides of industry might sometimes be capable of thinking shit through. So
yeah, they really got us this time. I got to admit, the Chamber of Commerce might have got the better of us that time.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. These guys are into the weeds here on data. I don't know. Like, Brook said he didn't believe in the ranking of countries in the innovation, and now he's disputing these GDP numbers and right way to measure it. Like, I don't know. It does seem like,
well, I mean, I also like though that Matt is making an argument here that's basically like pretty, like he should be like a libertarian like econ guy. Like Matt should be speaking to him in his own language, right? He's like, look, you clearly have these revealed preferences for greater leisure time, right? Like, what are you doing pricing that at zero, right? Like,
you should be imputing a value to it because it clearly has one. It went through like formal legislation and everything. Like, I expect there's formulas there you can even start with,
Yeah, and it's really like Euron is just treating this as if like Sweden has like an emperor who just decreed one day that he was going to limit working hours, and everybody's like, "Oh, god damn it, the emperor spoke again." All right, I guess we're going to work less.
They mandated it. Some people would want to work more hours, like I do at my real job, which is a job and it's real. I'll do it till 3 seconds before I die because it mainly involves sitting and looking at the computer.
I will unfortunately probably sit at the computer 3 seconds before I die. It's like gonna be like I'm gonna be on or like I'll be walking the dog or something, but I'll be on Twitter on my phone, and like I'll have
billable hours right there.
The incoming Russian ICBMs or whatever are gonna be coming in, and I will just like I'm gonna be fighting with like Cat Turd 2 about like birth rates on Twitter, and I'm just gonna be like, the scene in The Simpsons. Oh no, I've wasted my life.
I don't know. Cat Turd 2 had it coming. I still think you did the right thing, even if yes.
No, but I really showed him.
See, you stuck it to him. That's the important thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Surely what we will all wish,
on our deathbeds
is that we'd
spend more time confronting idiots online. Exactly. Probably what I will say. This is good stuff. I don't know. I mean, Bruenig's, I don't know. I think he's having an easy time here relatively. And yeah, like that's like a great way of approaching that argument. So
Yeah, he
See what
seems
else
to
they
be
got
having
in the
fun with
film.
it.
These guys did this all in a row. They look tired. Like I feel like I do feel the strain is telling on the fighters here. I feel like you could see the strain.
You can tell Matt got a little bit more impatient in this one, like toward the end, especially. Right,
He did
like
the eye rub a minute ago. He did like the big eye rub, looking down. Like you could see it's exhausting doing these things. Audience, you should know doing these debates will wear you out.
But yeah, it's like seriously, where do you think this stuff like laws which are passed democratically? I mean, like. Yeah, I mean, clearly not the Chamber of Commerce that's agitating for lowering the work week, right? Like, like seriously, like where do you like? He's just talking about it like this is something that was just imposed by like, like it's like it's like some Lovecraftian thing that came from beyond the stars to like force them to work less. It's like
that is how they view the Republic. That's what you just said is exactly right. Some evil, ungodly monstrosity that came, and we've served under it. The fucking Republic.
Yeah, it's like no, I'm pretty sure
through their numbers.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that organized workers are pretty invariably the force behind limitations on working hours for very obvious reasons because most people it's like look I don't know what to tell you, like I don't know Euron is I mean he's insane, but I mean like he seems like a perfectly nice guy interpersonally or whatever, but like I don't, it's like most people like their families and would like to be able to spend more time with them.
Yeah, that's like a common feeling. And also a similar common feeling is people would like to work less because their jobs are actually physically demanding. Now, what I mean by this, Euron, is that some jobs don't involve thinking a thought and typing it and going, like my job and yours, Euron. Other jobs involving moving objects around in the world. And it's a fucking nightmare. Break your body down. Again, we had great comments in the first segment's chat. Just people saying like, yeah, I don't know. I worked in this garage for a while. I've had 2 surgeries. I don't know how I'm going to make it. People say, that's the thing you hear blue collar people say. I don't know how I'm going to make it to retirement. That's what they say. You should think about that, Euron. I think Euron should be forced to work a blue collar job for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I really feel if you have to work a day in your life, you'll at least know not to say, even if you still think it, that it's great. You can work much later. Other countries, you can work for a really long time and then die at your work area. It's fantastic. You fucking jerk. People want time off because their jobs are stressful. So it's related. All these issues are related.
Yeah, no, exactly. Their jobs are stressful. They have this like literally it's physically demanding that like also like if you basically just have thoughts and write them down, then it's like you can pretty much do that. I mean eventually if you get old enough your brain might start to melt and like that might interfere with that, but like more or less more or less you can keep doing that until you just completely break down. But like, if you're, if you work at a warehouse, right? Like, this is, the thing about human bodies, I'm horrified to say, cause I'm keenly aware that, that from where I am right now and, we're increasingly edging into my mid 40s, there's lots of shitty stuff to look forward to, but it's like, human bodies break down over time. They don't just like, they're not perpetual motion machines that just like keep going and going and going forever. Right. Like, there's wear and tear in the machinery. Like it's, if you're doing, if you're doing something physically demanding, then like, like your literal ability to do it deteriorates over time. And then like also just, I don't know, again, like I have, yeah, if you are doing something you enjoy and like this is like creatively fulfilling for you, then it makes more sense that maybe you'll slow down a little bit at a certain age, but like you'll more or less keep it up. But like, you know, if it's a job and it's just a job, right? Like then yeah, you want to be able to stop, and you also, even before you stop, like even while you are, still fairly functional, you would typically like to be able to do it a little bit less. You value that leisure time. Also, by the way, people are going to value leisure more in societies where they aren't on the knife's edge of desperation. Like,
Yes. You have some, I want to say, social security. Like even if you have a hard time, it's like the society's fabric, like a safety net, if you will. Yeah, that's good stuff, But yeah, but I mean, Ben, the point is that you should decide for yourself your work life configuration with complete autonomy, which would be the case with capitalism. But because of awful statist tyranny, people mandate time off to spend with their beloved families you claim that people are so smushy for, and take them away from their wonderful jobs that you claim that they don't like. So the real issue here is that there's horrible tyrannical government mandates. And why? Just because large political majorities return several consecutive governments to power with a mandate on that specific issue. And then suddenly
out of nowhere, there's a mandate, right? Like, yeah. And there is, and it's just like, it's just amazing too, that like so much of these people's worldview relies on kind of pretending not to understand that collective action problems exist. That like, if you can, like, if you as an individual say, no, I don't want to work that many hours, right? Then have fun with that, right? But like, which is why, you need the collective barrier to like contracts of that kind, right? If you actually want to reduce the hours. But
and that's, again, like most of these guys will like fess up that they're antagonistic to democracy and stuff, similar to what they'll say about equality. So, when they discuss this stuff, like I'm reading John Norberg, the Cato guy and Swedish libertarian, and he kind of like repeats several of these sort of obnoxious mistakes, but he refers like to, oh, sure, these impositions on the market, they come from authoritarians, tyrannical governments, aggressive majorities, and then and police states. Like that's just in there. Like tyranny over me and my money, tyranny over me and my money. If you were elected to take my money away, I'm equally upset. It's like no distinction.
Although I suspect Norway too. By the way, Sweden unemployment rate for 2022 was 7.36%. I don't think the United States has seen a 7.36% unemployment rate in in kind of a couple of decades at least. So you want to use the employment rate. You want to use the employment rate because the unemployment rate is not measured consistently across countries. Anyone who's registered for unemployment benefits will be counted as unemployed in Sweden. In the United States, you have to answer a survey and say you're searching for work and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the employment rate's going to get you the objective measure of what percentage of the people who are in sort of the working age, what percent of them are getting up and working each day. And the answer is in Sweden, it's higher than the U.S. Yeah. They have to work because they're poor.
They're poor. That's the welfare state is getting them to work.
No, the welfare state. The welfare state is making the poor. They have to work more.
Okay, this is. I wasn't going to stop until we got to the end at this point, but it's like this is just magnificent.
It's hard sometimes to keep going.
Like this is amazing. Like we look, kids. We thought it was good when Euron spent 5 minutes talking about how, like, what really matters is how many unicorns you have, and then he was like, actually, it's kind of meaningless. Like this is, but just the way that without pausing to draw breath, he just seamlessly transitioned from And I do respect the fact that he is one of the rare right wingers who's actually trying to run Sweden sucks, but he it's a bold strategy, but
that play anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, no, I haven't seen anybody try this one on the board for 1975, but yeah, like so he just seamlessly went from Sweden sucks because the unemployment rate is so high to the unemployment rate is so low because they have to work so much because they're poor.
God, yeah, that's really especially facile. Yes, I guess those are.
Like,
yeah, dang, I don't know. Yeah, God. These are kind of these are hurting me a little bit more because I'm like, oh damn, it's taking like real blows now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what? So is
it character? But like, you still cringe at times.
Yeah, is Sweden? I'm lost, right? Is there more or less employment in Sweden, you're on, right? Like, because it just seems like his claim at this point reduces to it's okay, I have talking points either way, right? Like, and also, like, look, they clearly, if the GDP per hour, as Matt keeps pointing out, is actually better in Sweden, then it would not see, but like the GDP per capita is less because people choose to work less. That doesn't sound to me like they have to work more because they're poor.
No, and we should say like these numbers are like productivity per hour like is important, but like productivity is a slightly smushy concept at the actual level of measuring it in a lot of fields. A lot of the times, just to say like when it's like, well, this country over this country, like it really is like if they're close or not. A lot like Italy's GDP per hour is only a little bit below America's. I mean, people have all kinds of hilarious ideas. I enjoyed earlier where Brook said, "Oh, Ireland has a high productivity." Well, that's wrong. This list is wrong. This list is wrong. Israel's a high one. That is true. Like, what standard does it work here? You're on. Come on.
Yeah, right. So it's like so he's tested the data against like his hunches, right? Good. It's like, all right, well, the data is valid if it validates my hunch. It's like, well, it kind of seems like we can cut the data out of this, and you can just give me your impressions of countries.
Yeah, that's how we start. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think we're circling the drain here a little bit here, but it was a really good sort of 50-minute back and forth. We're coming to the last several minutes of the debate, so I think it was Matt who you started the empirical discussion, so I guess Yaron, you can start the closing thoughts for the empirical side of welfare. Does welfare actually help the poor in a world insofar as welfare actually does exist? Yaron, what are your final thoughts?
I mean, there's no question that welfare in the short run benefits the poor. It gives them cash. Of course, that is a plus. In the long run, I think its damage to the overall economy is far greater than the benefit it produces. And again, I don't have the counterfactual to show that, but it is suggestive that when you have a free market, the economy grows much faster. Also, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but I do want to emphasize this point that I do think that, in at least there's evidence from certain countries, maybe other countries are immune for this for some reason, that welfare has a massive negative externality, produces this moral hazard among people. I mean, I was, reading about these towns in England where they have these payments for illness and disability, and the number of people who suddenly have become disabled is quite stunning and sad. I also look at neighborhoods in the United States, south side of Chicago. Really every city has these neighborhoods where basically generation after generation after generation of people who are poor, who stay poor. The quality of their education is pathetic, and they stay poor and they stay on welfare. And what this welfare has done is destroyed their ambition. It's destroyed their will and desire to get out of this. And now, why that doesn't exist in the Nordic country is an interesting question. I mean, somebody should research that in terms of why is it that welfare doesn't have this kind of moral hazard effect on certain populations in Nordic countries. But that would be interesting to look in. But the fact is that in America, it clearly does. That is the communities that were robust in terms of growing out of poverty. The poverty is flatlined since the welfare state was established. That is a certain number of people. It seems to be relatively constant. Generally, if you look at the war on poverty, with the exception of old people, poverty rates in the United States are pretty flat since the late 1960s. And in terms of children's poverty, in some cases, it kind of goes up and down, but there have been periods since the war on poverty where children poverty has actually gone up. So I think it's immoral. Certainly, and I think as a consequence of immoral, it's just a question of figuring out exactly how it actually does damage. But I certainly think it does a significant damage to the psyche of those who receive it, and it is an affront to those who actually pay it.
All right, and Matt, what are your closing thoughts? Welfare, does it help the poor? Does it end up in the long term hurting us all through lower economic growth? What are your final thoughts? And I'll give a concluding remark for the show, and we can just go from there.
Yeah, so empirically, it seems that Yarn agrees that at least in the immediate sense, if you implement a welfare program, you're going to get lower poverty, you're going to get lower inequality, and of course, the data prove that out. When we expanded Social Security benefits, old age poverty went down. When we expanded the child tax credit, child poverty went down. It's really just as simple as that. You can do that inside a country over time and looking pre and post welfare benefits, especially the cash benefits that are specifically designed for this purpose. And you can do it across countries and compare countries with different levels of welfare provision, different kinds of welfare programs, and see the same thing, right? The more welfare programs that you have, not the more welfare programs, but the more well-designed welfare benefits that you have, the lower poverty and inequality that you're going to have in the immediate sense. His move here, and this is the classical move, he's not obviously invented this, is to say that, but over time it's going to be this big drag on growth. The problem there is that we just do not find drags on growth like he's talking about. We don't see it even inside the U.S., in any way that's clearly related to welfare, and we don't see it cross countries, such that higher welfare countries have lower growth than lower welfare countries. We don't see that, and part of where this confusion is, and this seems to be kind of how the debate muddled a little bit, was people are simply using wrong metrics, right? We're not looking at GDP per capita. We need to be looking at GDP per hour work. That is an indicator of how productive the economy actually is. And we also should be looking at employment rates, right? So you might say, okay, GDP per hour worked is high, but people aren't working because they're just living on the dole. That's why he wants to use this one town in the United Kingdom, for instance, somehow to prove that. You look at employment rates, they're higher. Right. So you don't have that issue. You just have people choosing leisure over labor, and that's done through, unions and the government. And if you don't count leisure as having any value, then you can say, hey, the U.S. is very rich compared to these other countries. If you count leisure as having value, as time off as being valuable in some way, then you're going to find quite the opposite. So empirically, the thing that he wants to use to counter the argument, right? Because he concedes up front, yeah, this is going to be good for poverty and equality. The thing he wants to use to counter is to say, but it's going to kill growth. But he doesn't have anything to show it's going to kill growth. He has nothing. He points to Hong Kong, I guess, and points to some welfare cheats potentially in the UK. I don't know anything about the seaside town he's talking about. But we don't see that broadly across societies, across countries. We don't see big welfare states associated with low employment rates. We don't see big welfare states associated with low growth. We don't see any of that. We don't see big welfare states associated with low social mobility. In fact, when I pointed out, hey, these countries have high social mobility, he just comes back and says, well, that's just because they're so equal. Which, yes, of course.
Yep.
So I think on the empirical point, I think he's really going to struggle. And, obviously the Randians are not exactly like a big empirical type. So, he's mostly going to rely on the first half of the debate, which is fine, and argue from first principles that we just cannot disrupt take from the takers, take from the makers. We can't be assaulting the producers this way. I think that's ultimately where he's going to have to wind up. I don't think that's a really good argument on sort of the moral question. And on the empirical question, I think, his position really collapses entirely because, it's based on this growth stuff that's just not real.
Boom! Got your ass.
You've been Burgessed.
There you go. Yeah.
That was pretty compelling. I think, sometimes you watch a long program and you're like, do I want to finish this? And you get to the end and you're glad you did.
Yeah.
And that's how you got a reward. For me, the got your ass was from your own. Like, I enjoy, he said, the stuff we hear, welfare has an externality and moral hazard, misusing two different economics concepts there. Neither of those apply. Let's just continue. It makes the towns with everyone sick. And he says, but then finally, like he gets, this is why you wait to the end. People get tired or they drop their guard more. South side of Chicago, poor, scary black neighborhoods. You understand. Like, yes, finally a specific example. Neighborhood of a town you haven't been to with a scary neighborhood that's associated with black and white ethnic communities that are very poor. He says, yes, they stay very poor. They were poor before welfare. Like, now there's some floor under it, especially for like moms and stuff. That's but like, interesting. Why doesn't it do that in Scandinavia? Why doesn't welfare have that effect in Scandinavia? Who knows why? Could it be related to the fact that you're annoyed that there's a black population in the United States?
Yeah, no, that is definitely an implication that was hovering around there. That it's interesting. Somebody should do an experiment. This is, I haven't measured the skulls, but somebody could. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, my God, it's so silly. Like, yeah, no, if there's one thing like I'm pretty sure of, if we remember, okay, so nothing when the Depression was going on counts. So again, let's just stick to the Roaring 20s. I'm pretty sure that urban black populations in the 1920s were doing great. That's what I've gathered from literature about that I've seen over the years. Very, very wealthy. It's just that, yeah, when the welfare state comes along for some weird reason, it makes, it's the south side of Chicago that, like, why doesn't, on Euron's worldview, why doesn't the work ethic, the ambition destroying effect of the welfare state, why is that not evenly distributed throughout the population?
Why isn't it happening? He said specifically, it'd be interesting to find out why that doesn't happen in Scandinavia, popularly associated as being the whitest location on earth. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. I feel like even if there's nothing there, I feel like old Euron's walking into a buzzsaw there, maybe.
Yeah, it's certainly, if that's not what he's saying, it's very confusing what he is saying. But yeah, no, it's just like, I think that, no, seriously, like, surely you, like, I don't know, man, like, you must have a bunch of your Randia friends who, I know Euron grew up in Israel, but it's like, surely there are a bunch of, ghouls he works with, at the Institute who grew up in the United States. Why wasn't their ambition destroyed by the welfare state?
Yeah, it seems like it's just so confusing. Like, none of these claims can be sustained. Like, it's like with Sweden, like, very quickly you're contradicting yourself if you have such an ideological view of these countries and there's so little.
Yeah, I just there. Yeah, I mean, again, I think that, like, yeah, Matt's response on that was perfect. I mean, like, this is, you could really tell, like, yeah, I mean, look, you could really tell that he's seen all of this before, right?
Yeah.
So
he really is. He's taught a few semesters, that guy, at this point.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you're looking at the wrong part of the graph. Scroll down.
Oh my God, that's like, oh my God. I was like, oh, the first part of this Bruenig Brook thing, that's all like the principal stuff. That's the most fun part. I'm less of a macro guy personally. Like, I want to enjoy this as much. Oh my God. Like, that's the gold moment from this.
Yeah.
Oh, God, Yaron, everything mean I've said about him, I still think about that moment and go, oh, poor bastard.
Yeah, like it's like, oh my God, Sweden, they've got such a high unemployment rate. Yeah, look at the employment rate.
Yeah, it's change in the I see. Yeah, actually, if you click here to format the data, see if you read the legend, you can see like, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh God, I don't know. It's like seeing Skeletor get kicked in the nuts. You're like, I don't like the guy, but like, you're in the moment. Oh.
No, you feel for him as all this is happening. Like it's just
yeah, God.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's clearly, and yeah, that was also really nice. Like, you got to hand it to the good synopsis and the closing statement, right? That like, just be able to say like, hey, here's the basic thing that you just saw go on, and like, let's abstract it to the sort of main lines of the argument, right? Like, we got into a lot of weeds, but basically, Euron admits that in the short term, poor people are better off if you give them some money. He's not going to die on that hill, right? He'll admit that. But he said, oh, no. But in the long term, right, you'll get these bad growth effects. But gosh, we don't seem to see those in the numbers. So what are we talking about here?
Well, different countries, the effects are different for unknowable reasons.
Yeah, no, it's the fjords. Jeb says, the sauna infrastructure is just superior.
I don't know. I'm struggling to find a way to interpret that. That's more charitable to our boy.
It seems pretty bad.
I'm gonna sleep on it. I don't want to jump to a conclusion. That's an easy thing that's sometimes done these days, is to read intense into fragments of things. But yeesh. Anyway, that's a pretty strong showing for Bruenig there. No wonder when you first posted this 2 weeks ago, Bruenig was like, "Oh yeah, that's a good one." He was not nervous about this being viewed.
No, definitely not. He did good. If there were individual moments, like, you mentioned with some of the innovation stuff, or 2 weeks ago, there were moments where like, I felt like he was playing with him a little bit too much on some of the normative stuff, where it's like, I would have like maybe paused to like zoom out a little bit about what we were talking about, right? Like
you know how easy it is to get into your Socratic teacher mode, and you're like, no, follow that thought through. You're like, no, wait, remember though.
Yeah, remember this is ultimately a persuasive exercise. It's like, just zoom out, be like, look, you're saying that it's wrong to take away something that somebody else's, but what do we mean by that, right? Like, what's the, you can't take something that's theirs. Well, do you mean legally theirs? Because if so, then statist redistribution can't violate that principle. So you must mean morally theirs. Well, if you mean morally theirs, aren't you just begging the question? Isn't this just like the issue and dispute between us right now? Is like, morally, who's entitled to which resources? Like that's
productive resources.
That's the kind of zoom out that I wish at a couple points during the normative part I wish you'd done a little bit more of. But like, overall, like, it was fantastic. I mean, like, he had
that's great. My only quibble was going a little further down than I would have on the unicorn path, especially because then at the end that proves I'm right, because then Brook's like, well, that probably doesn't matter anyway. Like, that shows it, because it was a cul-de-sac in the first place. You don't let them have even the innovation claim, people. Just take that. Just don't let them have. Give them an inch, they take a mile. These libertarians, so don't give them the inch.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. Yeah, that's a debate performance, man.
Yeah, it was like just. Yeah, I mean, look, the sort of basic normative argument in part one, like, Matt's the person I got a lot of that from in the first place. I mean, read my first book. I'm like crediting him for a lot of what I say about it. And then the empirical half, like he's got the, you know, I mean, like the command of the relevant facts is really impressive. And you know, like all the stuff he knows off the top of his head. It's like, no, you know, they yeah, that's because we measure unemployment differently. Look at the employment number. Like that's all really good. And yeah, that summation at the end was really good. If he was gonna get the last word in one of these, I'm glad it was the second half. So yeah, this is great, man. Well, let's wrap it for tonight. So yeah, thanks for coming on twice so quickly, and we will we'll see Professor Larson again soon, but call it for the night. Left is best.